just literally encircled by these men shouting at her, and she was being incredibly professional. She's the returning officer, she's got a legal duty, she was being incredibly professional, she was holding her own. But I just was furious at the sight of it. And I'd felt controlled by it. I'd been in a room upstairs with Shabana Mahmood and her family, and she'd had people throwing fireworks at her, just really horrible aggression, and I just watched these men shouting at all these women, and I thought, the difference between me and you later is I get to have a microphone. You can shout as much as you like, but I'll be on a stage and the camera will focus on me, and I will tell you exactly what I think of you, because I was just absolutely furious.
That was Labour MP and Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips speaking to me back in August, recounting the unpleasant election night she experienced last year. And you can hear our full conversation by subscribing to the Iain Dale All Talk podcast on Global Player or the brand new LBC app. Coming up in the next hour, it's Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. Joining me on the panel, Sharon Gaffka, political campaigner and former Love Island contestant. Not former Love Island contestant, Sir Andrew Mitchell, Conservative MP for Sutton Coldfield, who's former Deputy Foreign Secretary. Luke Charters is Labour MP for York Outer, and Annabel Denham is acting comment editor of the Daily Telegraph. They're here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number, and of course you can watch us on Global Player or the brand new LBC app.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the King and Prince Harry have had a private tea this afternoon. It's the first time they've seen each other in over a year and a half. LBC's Helen Hodgenott says there's no word on any meeting with other royals.
This summer, it was thought the relationship between Prince Harry and the royal family might be on the way to being at least partially patched up after senior aides to Charles and Harry were pictured meeting in London for talks. But the Duke remains estranged for now from his older brother, the Prince of Wales.
The US President Donald Trump has said, "Here we go," in a social media post reacting to Russian drones flying into NATO airspace overnight. They were shot down, and Moscow's defence officials insist they had no plans to target Poland. Israel's president says Britain remains a friend after meeting Sir Keir Starmer at Downing Street. It follows the PM's condemnation to strikes yesterday on Hamas leaders in Qatar. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, secured 116 nominations to take her above the 80 needed for the next round of the Labour deputy leadership race. Other contenders have until tomorrow evening to get enough support, though Alison McGovern's dropped out. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 17 points at 92.25. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather: rain clearing to the northeast tonight. Showers lingering in northern and western areas. Lows of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me tonight, to my left, Sharon Gaffka, political campaigner who's a former Love Island contestant. Sir Andrew Mitchell, next to her, Conservative MP for Sutton Coldfield, former Deputy Foreign Secretary. To my right, Annabel Denham, and acting comment editor for the Daily Telegraph. And next to her, Luke Charters, Labour MP for York Outer. So much going on tonight, so many subjects to cover. We're looking forward to getting your questions on 0345 6060 973, and of course you can watch us on Global Player or the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's get right to it. Stephen is in East Grinstead. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. Regarding Lord Peter Mandelson, should the Prime Minister still back him or sack him?
Luke.
Well, firstly, all of our thoughts go with those victims of Epstein. Disgusting, heinous crimes. People have absolutely every right, don't they, Ian, to ask the Ambassador Peter Mandelson some really tough and searching questions. The PM has said at the dispatch box today that he supports some of the work that the Ambassador's been doing, but people, let's be honest, they've got absolutely every right to have to ask tough questions to Peter Mandelson.
Were you in the chamber at 4 p.m. queues today? Because I saw, I mean, my interpretation of what happened today was I've never seen Keir Starmer look so unsure of himself. And the faces on all of your MPs behind him, I mean, you all look really uncomfortable.
Well, it is uncomfortable. Of course it is. You know, what Epstein did, and Peter Mandelson himself today, didn't he? He said he deeply regrets it. Deeply, deeply regrets. It's an uncomfortable situation, and transparency is absolutely key here.
And have you seen these, what Peter Mandelson's said in these leaked emails tonight that have come out? Because I don't know how anyone can survive this. Because often, when politicians are in political trouble on the verge of resignation, that there is a point where you think, well, there's only one answer to this, there's only one outcome. Do you think that on the basis of what you know so far, it would be much better for Keir Starmer to sack him rather than let him resign?
Well, to be honest, look, I'm a backbencher at him, and he's a Crown servant, isn't he? I don't know the ins and outs of it, but keep asking those tough questions. People have every right to put those to him. I think they're for him.
Andrew Mitchell, you served as Deputy Foreign Secretary. I don't know whether you've ever had to call in an ambassador to sack them, but it's within the Prime Minister's power to do that, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it is, but I think that my Labour colleague is absolutely right to say that we should focus, when it comes to Epstein, on the victims and the many, many people whose lives he ruined or very badly damaged. I'm slightly compromised, Ian, on Peter Mandelson because he was my pair in the House of Commons in the last century. And as you know, a pairing arrangement is a close arrangement, and he's a friend of mine. And I think a lot of what he has done is very good. He's also at a pivotal moment in relations with America. He's at the crease, if I may use a cricketing metaphor. President Trump is coming here next week. It's an incredibly important visit. And in the role that he has undertaken in America, I think most people would agree he's done a pretty good job. And so for me, tonight, the issue is this. This is clearly acutely embarrassing, as Peter himself has said. But is it illegal? Has he done something illegal? Because embarrassment he can survive, illegality he can't. And I think that's where the debate should rest tonight.
I hate to bring back painful memories, but you, of course, resigned from the cabinet, and in very different circumstances, obviously. But somebody in that position, do you know when essentially the game is up?
Well, it was Alistair Campbell who used to say that if you were still in the news after 2 weekends, so 9 days, then that was it. I actually survived 3 weeks in that. It is absolutely terrible. And ever since then, and before then too, I've always found it distasteful, this business when the hunt is after people, the media and everyone is after politicians. Politicians have to accept what they do and address it, and the media is quite right to go after them if they've done anything wrong. But I'm temperamentally now deeply unsuitable for the sort of thing that happened to Angela Rayner. You know, last week I fully accept that if you're the Deputy Prime Minister and you're the Housing Secretary, what she did was very difficult to defend. But the ethics advisor made it clear that he thought she had integrity. And so these massive campaigns where people really get rolled up, I think often of their family and the people who, their friends and so on, who are going through it by proxy with them.
Sharon Gaffka.
Hello.
Hello.
No,
what do you make of
this? I'm not going to sit on the fence like either of my two panellists. I think that Keir Starmer should ask him to resign. You know, as a Vauxhall campaigner and as someone who works with survivors of a lot of heinous crimes in the gender-based violence realm, how can a government that pledges to halve violence against women and girls stand by somebody who is quite... I've seen the comments that are in these leaked emails, how terrible it was for him to undergo such hardship during the prosecution. Well, I looked at the press conference the survivors did recently. How can somebody look survivors in the eye and say, we support you, we want to tackle gender-based violence, while openly supporting somebody who can remain friends with a convicted sex offender.
What do you make of Andrew's argument, though, that he has been quite successful as ambassador to the US? Obviously, Donald Trump has his own issues with the Epstein case as well. How, if Keir Starmer did sack him, how would that affect relations between the UK government and Donald Trump, do you think?
I mean, personally, I can see why that would be a sticking point. But I think as well, you have to remember how it looks domestically. And with the Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Leadership elections coming along, we can see that he's going to face challenges from his membership already. And I think this is just going to be an even further sticking point.
Annabel Denham.
I do think that Keir Starmer should sack him. I think it's deeply problematic when the US ambassador himself becomes the story. I don't agree with the argument that he should be given some stay of execution purely because it'd be intensely awkward or damaging to the government with the Trump state visit next week. And I think that the longer that Starmer vacillates, the weaker he will look. He needs to tell the British public whether he, a former DPP, is prepared to believe Mandelson, or will he say, the Prime Minister, that Mandelson expressing all of this regret is insufficient? And if, as appears...
I think it's possible to believe Mandelson that he genuinely is regretful.
Well, or to think that is, or to believe that that is sufficient for him not to need to resign, which I don't believe that it is, if he used his position as business secretary to have a financial arrangement with Jeffrey Epstein. And, it is very uncomfortable for Mandelson that he had a relationship with Epstein after his conviction. I just cannot see how he can possibly recover from this. And as I say, I think that Starmer will look very indecisive and weak at a time when his position is already quite precarious in the Labour Party if he hesitates too much with this, as he did with Angela Rayner last week.
Well, let's get a different aspect on this in the discussion. Chris is in Richmond. Chris, hi, what would you like to ask?
Good evening. Would the panel agree with Iain's interesting suggestion of appointing Nigel Farage as US ambassador were Lord Mandelson to fall on his sword?
When you say it was my suggestion, I was being slightly frivolous in that suggestion.
I know you were.
Well, let me just explain to the panel, because other listeners may have heard this earlier. But I suggested that he could appoint Nigel Farage, and if Farage said yes, that neuters Reform UK in one fell swoop. And if he says no, Keir Starmer can portray Nigel Farage as being unpatriotic. So you win-win for Keir Starmer. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's an interesting theory. Luke?
Come on, Ian, let's not give Farage any more reasons to be away from Clacton, right? You want your ambassador to the US to talk up this country. And what was Farage doing last week? Talking Britain down, saying we should have sanctions. It's a disgrace. Plastic patriot. Spend more time in Clacton, mate, and forget. And don't forget, look at the joke of the Reform Conference. Anti-vaxxers and singing songs left, right and centre. Spend more time in Clacton.
I've heard a few songs at Labour conference, to be fair to them.
Well, none from singing Iain Dale in a Union flag suit.
That would not happen. You're absolutely right on that. But I can imagine Rachel Reeves maybe belting one out. Maybe not. Annabel.
Well, I'll just respond to one point now, which is that when Labour came into power, they talked down this country and the economy to such a degree that business and household confidence went through the floor. Had the Conservatives put Farage in the Lords back in 2017, was it, when it was suggested, then perhaps they wouldn't be facing some of the challenges that they are today. Now, I'm sure that Farage might like to appoint Farage as US ambassador in certain respects. I'm not convinced that the Reform leader will accept, given how his party is polling.
Sharon.
I agree with the sentiments that I think that we don't need to give him any more reason to be away from Clacton. But, we're struggling to see any actual policies, domestic policies from the Reform Party. So aside from his friendship to Donald Trump, I actually don't know what else he could provide for us on the international stage. A very tough international situation that we're in, given that what we're seeing in Gaza and overseas in Ukraine.
Andrew, I don't know if you know this, but apparently if Keir Starmer hadn't appointed Peter Mandelson, he was going to appoint your very good friend George Osborne.
Well, I've seen that speculation.
I know George Osborne has confirmed it.
And has he said he would have accepted?
He didn't say. I think he would have done, but he didn't actually say it.
Well, the thing about George is he's very good at doing lots of different jobs. So I suppose he might have been able to, add that one to his list.
Yeah, I don't think he could have had many of the others.
No, he'd have been an outstanding ambassador, of course. But to the question that you wanted answered, which was whether or not Farage was likely to go to be ambassador, or if Starmer offered him the opportunity. I would say two things. First of all, he's definitely not going to take it because he's got a party to run and he thinks he might be Prime Minister in 4 years' time. And secondly, he has the enormous privilege, as I do, representing the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, to which you are visiting on Friday. The bunting is already up ahead of your state visit. But it's a huge privilege to be a Member of Parliament, and he must have that privilege in Clacton and look after his constituents.
Chris, let's come back to you. I know from previous calls you're not exactly Nigel Farage's #1 fan, but what do you think of the idea?
I mean, I thought it was quite amusing. I know it was tongue-in-cheek. I mean, the point that all of the panelists have made, Luke's point particularly about the fact that he slagged off the UK last week and you were pretty vociferous in your criticism of him, it was outrageous. So he is the last person I would want, but I think it would be quite interesting. It would be kind of checkmate for him, really, wouldn't it? Because he said in the past he wants more influence and thinks he needs to have a bigger role in his best friend of Donald Trump. So, we'll take him at his word,
OK, Chris, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, one suggestion would be to bring back Dame Karen Pierce, who I think was a superb ambassador, and Donald Trump really liked her.
Who was absolutely outstanding.
Yeah.
A real tribute to the Foreign Office that they have someone of that quality out there doing such a brilliant job for Britain.
Well, bring back Karen. Maybe the campaign launches here. We are going to be crossing to Simon Marks in a moment for some horrible news from the United States. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
16 minutes past 8. Let's just interrupt Cross Question for a second and cross live to Washington, D.C. Simon Marks is LBC's US correspondent. He's got some news about a shooting at Utah Valley University. Simon, what's happened?
Yes, very distressing news here this afternoon that has taken Washington by shock, Ian. Charlie Kirk, one of the country's most prominent pro-Trump conservative activists, the head of Turning Point USA, the host of very popular podcasts among Donald Trump's supporters, has been shot while making an appearance at Utah Valley University. That is in the town of Orem, not far from Provo. Video from the event shows Charlie Kirk sitting beneath a tent addressing a large crowd. The tent is emblazoned with a slogan that says, "America American comeback. And around the side, it says, prove me wrong. In other words, challenging members of the audience, if they want, to try and disagree with his argument that Donald Trump is creating an American comeback. And as he is talking, what sounds like a single shot rings out. Charlie Kirk immediately slumps in his chair. He has reportedly been shot in the neck. Chaos ensues at the event as people flee from that university campus where Charlie Kirk was speaking. We do not know what condition he is in. A suspect has been detained by police at the scene, indeed appears to have been subdued by members of the crowd. President Trump has immediately taken to his social media account to say we must all pray for Charlie Kirk, who has been shot. A great guy from top to bottom. God bless him, says President Trump, of a man who is a very close friend and prominent supporter of President Trump and a pivotal seismic figure within Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement. There have been tensions and differences between the two men. Charlie Kirk is one of those conservatives here, calling on the White House for full transparency over the Jeffrey Epstein files and over whatever Donald Trump's friendship and relationship may have been with the disgraced and deceased financier. But the White House, the Trump administration, and also some Democrats. We've already seen a message from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, describing this as a vile attack, all now reacting to this news that Charlie Kirk, one of the most prominent conservative voices in the United States, the head of Turning Point USA, has been shot while making a speech at Utah Valley University. Again, we do not know what condition he's in.
Simon, thank you for bringing us up to date. That's Simon Marks there. Well, if we do get any further news on Charlie Kirk's condition, we will bring that to you, of course. Let me tell you who's on our cross-question panel tonight, if you've just tuned in. Sharon Gaffka, political campaigner, former Love Island contestant. Andrew Mitchell, Conservative MP for Sutton Coldfield, former Deputy Foreign Secretary. Luke Charters, a Labour MP for York Outer. And Annabel Denham, acting comment editor of the Daily Telegraph. Right, a text question now from Andrew. Today, the Financial Times front page reported that Sir Keir Starmer is setting up a budget board to assist with planning the next budget and to avoid another bust-up with business. Does the panel think this now clearly indicates that the Chancellor has made some very damaging economic errors of judgment with her previous budget, and should the PM still have confidence in her, given that he has now had to assemble a whole budget board to guide him and her? Annabel Denham, I don't recall any sort of budget board in any Blair, Brown, Johnson, Cameron government at all.
No, me neither. And this is a pretty strong signal, as was the reshuffle last week of the senior teams at number 10 and number 11, that Keir Starmer is losing confidence, losing faith in his Chancellor. And no wonder, because every economic data point has worsened since Labour came into power. Inflation. Inflation is at 3.8% when the Tories left it at 2%. Growth forecasts have been halved. If you want to talk about the gilt yields, they actually have reached higher point under Labour than they did even in the aftermath of the Truss mini budget.
Well, you can pull
we've
up the
had
we've had more
millionaires.
Hang on, Luke, you'll get your chance in a second.
We've had more millionaires leave this country under Labour than we did under Conservative administrations. And it's no wonder, because Labour came into power saying there would be no tax rises beyond those set out in the manifesto. And then Rachel Reeves gave a statement in October last year, during which she hiked them by £40 billion, including a £25 billion increase to national insurance contributions. And businesses are responding accordingly, which is why we're seeing job vacancies down, unemployment is up. And as I say, you are going to have an increasing number of talented and wealthy individuals leaving the country and taking their investments with them. So the situation is only going to worsen. The problem, of course, we have is after the welfare row before the summer, it's patently clear that Labour are not going to be able to cut government spending as they desperately need to do. Our debt to GDP ratio is now around 100%. We are spending billions, tens of billions of pounds servicing the debt, and that means that the Chancellor will have to go again to the British public and ask them to pay even more into the exchequer. She's going to have to raise taxes again, which will be deeply unpopular. So one does actually wonder why it is that Keir Starmer has decided to centralise control of the economy in this way at this time, because the budget won't just have Rachel Reeves' fingerprints on it, but his too.
So, Luke, what would this budget board do?
Well, just say you look at 30-year gilt yields, look at other countries, similar economies, same trajectory. My constituents back in York Outer are having their mortgages come down through the rates, cut. On the concept of a budget board, I've come from the private sector, Ian. It's quite normal to set budgets in this way.
Unusual for a Labour MP, has to be said.
Well, we've got a huge set of experienced colleagues. We've had a reshuffle just in the last week, but it's completely normal to do this. Business confidence is growing leading up to the budget. That is, go and look at the stats, pull them up if you want. But we should be confident that we're going to have a budget in line with the fiscal rules that's going to grow the economy and keep inflation down.
But why does Rachel Reeves need a budget board? Because she has no ideas of her own.
Well, I think as I just said, Ian, come on, let's look at the rest of the private sector. It's a good move. Let's bring in all the talents. And frankly, for too long, budgets have been set on a very short-term basis. We've got to look to the future, set out investment plans. We've just set out all of our investment strategy, look on a longer-term horizon, just like you would in the private sector.
But it depends who's on a board, doesn't it? Because if you've got some interesting people with interesting ideas on a board, all well and good. But it seems to me that it's going to be dominated by the likes of the Resolution Foundation, whose only objective in life seems to me to be put up taxes.
Well, you've got some very clever cookies in government that have huge experience. Dan Tomlinson, Torsten, who you refer to.
Yeah, but they're both Treasury ministers. I don't see the need for a board if you've got talented people as Treasury ministers.
Well, we've got a huge set of talent. Look at what the private sector do. I think we're going to see the OBR. They're going to do the forecast, and we should be anticipating that business confidence is going to increase in the coming weeks.
Well, I hope you're right. Sharon Gaffka, what do you make of this idea?
I mean, I will never sit here and pretend like I'm a big I'm well cued in on the economy, but from a social policy perspective, it's quite normal for the government to reach out to lots of different experts in different fields in order to be able to understand what is needed by these different organisations. So maybe personally, I don't necessarily see it as an issue. I think it could be seen as embarrassing, like Rachel doesn't exactly know what she's doing, but I don't see it as that big of an issue at this current juncture.
Andrew?
Well, the problem with being in opposition, there are many problems with being in opposition, is that you want your country to do well, but you don't particularly want the government to do well. And it's one of the curses of opposition. And I think we're in an incredibly worrying situation. I'm not going to repeat everything that Annabel Denham said, but I think she put it far better than I can. That is the challenge facing our country. And the point I would make, I don't know what the board will do. He's sort of got a new team in number 10. But the problem that we face is this government seems to have the sort of reverse of the Midas touch. And they came in saying that growth was the key, which is correct. But they seem to have done everything they possibly can to ensure that we don't get any growth. And even more alarming, you and I have known chancellors with whom we haven't agreed. There's been left-wing chancellors in the past where I haven't agreed with what they wanted to do, but at least I thought they knew what they were doing. And the problem with this government is they don't seem to know what they're doing on the economy. And that is going to affect real lives, people's living, their families, their earnings, their opportunities dramatically. And I just hope we're not returning to the 1970s when we had a Labour government there which practically bankrupted the country. Because this government, they can't cut because their backbenchers won't allow them to cut public expenditure. They're going to break their promises on tax. It's a very, very unhappy economic situation.
But they will say, well, it is an unhappy economic situation, but that's because of 14 years of Tory government and the legacy they were left.
Well, for all the reasons that Annabel so eloquently set out, that is not the case.
What reality are you in, Andrew? 14 years, Liz Truss mini budget. You want to talk about gilt? Go look at a 30-year gilt yield graph and look at the day of the mini budget, and it spiked it up. That's every working person in this country on their mortgages for decades to come. That spike in how they change the bond markets because of that irresponsibility.
But it spiked even higher in autumn last year.
Well, we've had to bring in complete new rules to safeguard budget responsibility because of that reckless decision not to score that budget, mini budget.
You should listen very carefully to what Annabel is saying and learn from what she said about the economy, because you ask which planet I'm on. Your party and you are on a planet which is in danger of doing very, very grave damage to this country and its economic future. And a bit of humility before this budget, trying to work out why things have gone wrong and putting them right, would not go amiss.
Well, growing the economy, just look at, say, what we did with the EU summit deal. Supermarket bosses queuing to welcome it. How are you going to bring down food price inflation? We've got a plan to reduce the cost of living for hard-working grafters who are listening in now.
But what about the hard-working grafters who haven't had a pay rise because of your national insurance imposition, and people who've lost their jobs because of it, and all the employers who aren't hiring as many people as they would have done had that not come in?
What about the millions of workers in this country that are having an increase in their national minimum wage? What about the thousands of parents in this country that have got 30 hours for each childcare?
You're indulging in whataboutery now. I mean, you can't answer the question about the groups of workers that I've said.
Families are better off, cheaper childcare, people on the minimum wage, employment rights, ending insecure work so people have got
but
stability
employment
to
hasn't
look
risen.
after their
Employment
families.
is actually falling, and job vacancies are falling. Unemployment is rising, isn't it?
Well, labour market participation is up. Actually, we do have.
What does that even mean?
We do need to.
Unemployment is up.
We need to
job
look
vacancies
at
are down.
The economic inactivity when it comes to NEETs, those not in work. We've got a plan for that, but we have absolutely got to put more pounds in the pockets of parents, through childcare. And that is what we're doing through rolling out.
The 33 hours of childcare is actually Conservative policy,
Yes, exactly.
and it's costing £10 billion a year.
We delivered
so it's just
through
another,
working with the
and it
sector.
will actually mostly go to middle class families. That's what the evidence shows from the previous subsidy under the Conservatives when it was 15 free hours. So all you're really talking about is yet more government spending. Labour's only answer to the fact that we are spending far too much and we are living beyond our means and we haven't had a balanced budget since 2001 is for the state to spend yet more money with the taxpayer footing the bill.
Well, I really dispute the idea that free childcare goes to the middle classes. Tell that to the nurse in my constituency that's taking on extra shifts. The single mum who I met door knocking the other day. It's a huge transformative effect on productivity.
No, it's not. There are massive deadweight costs associated with it. It goes to people who would pay for the childcare themselves anyway, and it's funded often by those who are on lower incomes.
Right, we're going to move to international affairs after the news. You can guess what after what Russia did last night. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The King and Prince Harry have had a private tea this afternoon at Clarence House. It's the first time they've seen each other in over a year and a half. It's reported US Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk has been shot at an event at Utah Valley University. Police have confirmed shots were fired and the FBI says it's closely monitoring the situation. The Education Secretary is an early favourite to become the next Deputy Labour leader after securing 116 nominations from fellow MPs. It takes Bridget Phillipson above the 80 needed to get to the next round. LBC weather, rain clearing to the northeast tonight, showers lingering in northern and western areas, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32 on LBC. On the panel tonight, Annabel Denham from the Daily Telegraph, Labour MP Luke Charters, Sir Andrew Mitchell, Conservative MP, and Sharon Gaffka, political campaigner. Right, Chris in Stubbington is asking this question on a text. Has Russia pushed NATO closer to a war by violating Polish airspace with military drones, and are we prepared for what might happen next? Andrew Mitchell, former Deputy Foreign Secretary.
Well, the position worsened as a result of Putin pushing against what has happened before, allowing targeting drones across the border into a NATO country. That is very serious indeed. I think the Poles have reacted in entirely the right way in going for a Section 4 within the NATO agreement move rather than 5, and that's the right thing to do.
Just explain the difference.
So 5 is an attack on one, is an attack on all. The 4 is to talk and try and work out what's been going on. But, everything has changed with this war. Europe has to accept that it's got to defend itself. There's going to have to be an enormous hike in defence spending. And it's another expense that Luke and his colleagues are going to have to recognise, because America has made it clear that it expects Europe to defend itself. That has very serious consequences. And we cannot duck this, because if Putin manages to take Ukraine, he will go after the Baltic states, and he will continue to press at the weaknesses in NATO. He spent his COVID time reading long tracts of ancient Russian imperial history. This is an acute danger for our generation, and we have to face it and we have to deal with it. And that's going to mean a very big increase in defence expenditure, modernising a lot of our defence capacity that we have at the moment, working more closely with other NATO countries, trying to ensure we keep America engaged as much as we possibly can. And the first thing that they demand is that we meet the expenditure targets that have got to be met. So, this is a very dangerous time, a very dangerous situation. And it is no time either for appeasement. We have to be very clear as major European countries that we will not tolerate this extraordinary situation where Russia has, one of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, Russia has invaded its neighbour, slaughtered its citizens, bombed and destroyed its infrastructure, acts that we all thought had been consigned to the history book in the last century.
What do you think Putin's agenda was with this incursion into Polish airspace? Because, they're trying to say, we didn't really mean to do it, but they clearly did, because there were so many drones. That it can't be a coincidence. Yes,
they clearly did. Once again, Putin is testing the resolve of NATO and the European countries, his neighbours too. He's testing that. And we've all seen what's going on in Finland at the moment. We have to say no, and we have to. What is going on in Finland? The Russians are continuing to press in Scandinavia and in particular in Finland. So these are very serious times. Of course, we want to secure a ceasefire and a deal on Ukraine, but I go back to what I said. Putin has to be confronted and stopped, otherwise he will go elsewhere.
Sharon,
I agree that Putin's only responds to strength. And I think that what is happening in conversations between Putin and Trump is that I think Donald Trump is observing a lot rather than following through with some of the things he was saying. And I think that the US could put stronger economic sanctions on Russia in order to stop them from continuing their oppression. I know that they could also follow through with their bipartisan bill, which was going through Congress, to be able to put those strong sanctions onto Putin, because it just feels like Trump's sitting in his back pocket.
It's really weird, isn't it? Because as far as I can see, Trump hasn't actually said an awful lot about what happened in Poland overnight today. You thought, when will the scales fall from his eyes about what Putin's real agenda is?
I just think that maybe there's too much of trying to protect previous friendships as opposed to actually doing what we think is right in terms of protecting Europe. And I think that maybe Trump is also trying to push Europe into increasing its NATO spending, which we know is an agenda that he's been pushing through for a long time.
Which he's entirely right on, isn't he?
No, and I don't disagree, but I just think that there are steps in between that and going to war straight away. I think that economic sanctions are the first things that we should try.
Luke?
It's obviously really concerning to see that incursion into Polish airspace, and the Prime Minister's obviously called the Polish Prime Minister to offer support. John Healey's been meeting with the defence ministers, but I think it underlines why we need to prepare the coalition of the willing to support Ukraine. I hope everyone would recognise the leadership role the Prime Minister has taken around building that coalition of the willing. And, of course, all of that detailed operational planning is going ahead.
Do you think that may have been partly Putin's agenda to send a warning to European countries that, well, if you do that, if you do have European troops stationed or NATO troops stationed in Ukraine, this is what you can expect from us?
Well, we, of course, will support Ukraine. We're supplying them with kit and equipment. And even in this recent incursion, it was actually Germany, wasn't it, that helped with some of the interception of those drones. We stand together and we will continue to supply Ukraine with those important aid. And in my constituency in York Out, I've got Queen Elizabeth Barracks and we've got the Army Medical Service. And the Army Medical Service is training the Ukrainian forces in paramedic skills, in medical skills for the battlefield. That's happening in my constituency in York, and we have to continue all of that aid, not just equipment, but training as well.
Annabel.
Well, this, I think, was clearly a calculated escalation from Putin to test the will of the Atlantic Alliance. And in that respect, our response was absolutely right, that we did not leave Poland to defend its airspace alone. I think this is in part a consequence of, I would go further than Sharon, I think it's Trump's indulgence of Putin. Just a couple of weeks ago, there he was rolling out the red carpet for him in Alaska. And yet in the interim, not only have we seen events of this escalation of the last 24 hours, but we also saw him palling up with Xi and Kim Jong-un at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There was that real sense of bonhomie for that photo shoot that they were doing. And this is just such a blatant snub to Putin, to Trump, and one just has to wonder why he can't see it. But I think Andrew made some very important points about the fact that we must find a way now to move back to being not a welfare economy, but a warfare economy. At the moment, we are really struggling to meet the NATO demand of 2% of GDP being spent on defence. Poland is spending 4.7% of its GDP on
And today
defense.
You can see why.
And today you can see why. Now, you might argue that, of course, there's the proximity there, but that's not to say that it isn't a threat to the UK as well as a member of NATO, or indeed other European nations which are failing to meet the expectation of NATO in terms of how much they're spending on their militaries. So I think at some point we need to wake up. We need to realise that there has to be a fundamental retrenchment of government expenditure in certain areas in order that we can have a 1930s-style rearmament and a show of strength to Putin that will act as a proper deterrent.
Okay, let's move on to another question. Deborah in Sheffield says, with Prince Harry having met his father, the King, this evening, can the Sussexes rebuild their public role in this country, and should he be allowed, or should they be allowed to do that? Now, the Duke of Sussex met with His Majesty the King for 54 minutes at Clarence House. I don't know who was doing the timing this evening. This was their first meeting since February of last year. Sharon, let's come to you first on this. Do you think that, I'm told that Prince Harry wants to come back to this country with his family. That's going to be incredibly difficult, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's difficult for him to come back with... the court of public perception might make it difficult for them, but I don't think it's difficult logistically, and I don't actually think they want to be back as public figures. I do think that Harry just wants to rebuild the relationship with his father, given the fact that the King's health is deteriorating and neither of them are getting any younger. I just think that, despite the fact they are royals, we should just let families do their own thing and allow them maybe that slight bit of privacy that we would all expect for our own families.
It's never going to happen, though. I mean, you're never going to have the British media who are particularly interested in these things letting them have that space, because you've got all of these royal commentators looking for little snippets of information that their competitors haven't got.
No, and I think that's probably contributed to the breakdown in the royal family's personal lives in the first place, and what pushed Meghan and Harry to move overseas in the first place. But obviously, given the fact that a number of royals have experienced health issues, and we provide them with some kind of grace and privacy in undergoing those medical treatments, I think that given how fractured and sensitive things are at this current juncture, I think that it's probably out of British politeness to try and give some privacy. I know it's not British media's MO, but I look at them as a family rather than as the royals.
Andrew?
I completely agree with Sharon's point. They are a family, and all families have problems from time to time. All their problems, of course, are carried out and take place in the glare of publicity, in the glare of public attention. And everyone is thirsts, really, for more news on the soap opera, which can be the royal family. But we should remember that Prince Harry's done an enormous amount of good if you look at the work he's done through Help for Heroes. And if they want to come back, then I think we should do what we can to make sure that they can come back. But above all, they are a family, and we want them to be a happy family. And I just wish them all well in trying to achieve that state of happiness.
Annabel, what do you think your readers are going to make of this development?
I suspect they're quite torn, Ian, as indeed I am. Look, on the one hand, the Sussexes have missed no opportunity to air their dirty laundry and to criticise not just the royal family as a family, but as an institution as well. And the whole episode has been deeply unedifying and difficult to watch. But at the same time, I do think that Prince Harry is quite a sad case. My suspicion is that he would like nothing more than to repair the relationship that he has with his brother and with his father. And I think it would be a great show of magnanimity if the King and Prince William were able to welcome him back into the fold.
See, my view is that the King would really like to do that, but William has absolutely zero intention of doing so. But what do I know? Luke?
Well, I agree with Andrew, really. The royal family serve our country well, and like any human being, they deserve the right to family life, so we wish them well.
Is that all? I mean, let me just add something onto this, because how can I put this politely? I suspect that Prince Harry would quite like to come back to this country, but I wonder whether his wife would. Because it seems to me that she's been the one driving a lot of the publicity, the interviews that they've done. And yet you have to be so careful, because you sort of you paint her as sort of the I'll say injured party. That's not really the right expression here, but if you sort of paint her as the one that's to blame for everything, that's not quite right. I mean, they have a sort of they're both partners in this marriage. I don't think it's fair to say that she sort of rules the roost or anything, because I mean which is what some of the tabloid newspapers like to do, isn't it?
Well, they are a union, but nevertheless, I struggle. I do often find myself thinking that she is the villain, as it were, of this piece. It does feel as though she was the one who came in and took him away from his family, first to Canada and then to California. I wonder, at this stage, at this juncture, I suspect that she wouldn't want to return to the UK, and certainly not to start fulfilling more formal royal duties. But perhaps as their various business ventures fail, as so many seem to have done, unfortunately, in the past, perhaps her perspective will change.
Well, if you charge £9 for a jar of raspberry jam, you deserve all you get. 8:45.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Sharon Gaffka is with us, Andrew Mitchell, Luke Charters and Annabel Denham. Let's go to a text question from Nadine in Manchester. Does the Prime Minister deserve to be condemned for letting the Israeli president into Downing Street? Andrew.
No, it's extremely sensible to talk, and you have to talk to people you disagree with. And I think they will have had a fairly strong exchange of views. And I hope that the point the Prime Minister will have made is that it is absolutely essential we move to achieve a ceasefire and then a political process, because Hamas can end this immediately by releasing the hostages. If Hamas announced tonight they were releasing the hostages, then what is happening in Gaza City and in Gaza would change immediately.
Would it?
But yes, it would, because the reason why there's this terrible situation developed in Gaza is because Hamas will not release the hostages. But the point I want to make is this. There will at some point be a ceasefire. There will be a political process. The job of politicians here is not to ventilate the grievance, but to try and make sure that we get that process going. And the one glimmer of optimism has been that we now have Egypt and Turkey and Saudi and Qatar saying that there is the basis for moving forward with a peace agreement, and accepting, all of them, that there is no role whatsoever for Hamas in the West Bank or in Gaza or in any form of government. Now, that is a good way, with those regional powers, of starting to move forward this political process.
And if we were talking on Sunday, that all sounds very reasonable, but then the Israelis went and tried to kill the Hamas negotiators in Qatar. That surely indicates that Israel has no interest in a ceasefire.
Well, it emphasises both how very difficult this all is, but secondly, how important and essential it is to move on to that peace track. And remember that it was after the Intifada that we so nearly got there at Oslo many years ago. And, the darkest hour is the one before dawn. We have to. The job of politicians in Britain, ministers in Britain, the Foreign Office, which has a role to play. We have a deep historic relationship in that part of the world. It's very, very important that people don't give up and that they are committed 24/7 to trying to get to that peace process.
OK, Luke Charters.
I think you do have to meet people you disagree with. You get the chance. The Prime Minister today will have had the chance to look President Herzog in the eye and say, let's get aid in, stop the atrocities, what happened in Qatar, call it out. When you meet someone to disagree with, you can look them in the eye and call those things out, because diplomacy is the way, and to simply turn them away, I'm afraid, I think is a bit of a student politics.
Which is what Keir Starmer said, I think, at PMQs today, didn't he? In response to Stephen Flynn. Annabel.
No, I don't think that Starmer should be condemned for letting Herzog into Downing Street. It's absolutely the right thing to do, and thank goodness he resisted the opposition to him doing so. It's really important that these politicians are able to have discussions, particularly behind closed doors. In fact, I think we've seen too many Labour members opining on this subject and casting aspersions on the actions of the Israeli government, when actually a lot of these conversations would be better had in private. And a further point is there has been an explosion in anti-Semitism in this country since October 7th. That is a moral stain, in my mind, on Britain. And can you imagine the effect that Keir Starmer refusing to meet the Israeli president would have had on that? 1 in 5 people, according to a survey at the weekend, are now anti-Semitic. I just find that, frankly, appalling. And this today is a very important show of support for the British Jews.
Sharon.
Firstly, I obviously condemn what happened on October the 7th and any form of anti-Semitism. However, I personally don't agree with having a member of the Israeli government in Downing Street for...
Well, he's not. He's a ceremonial president.
Fine, a ceremonial president rolling out... Because we condemned Donald Trump for rolling out the red carpet and offering some form of hospitality to Putin. I personally don't see this as...
Sorry, are you comparing Putin to President Herzog, the president of a democratic state?
But what I'm trying to explain...
And he's not the head of government.
OK, but he's made some very questionable comments about what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank. And it's all well and good for Keir Starmer to sit there and say, I want to have open conversations with people we don't potentially share opinions with. But it was only a couple of hours ago that Israel just bombed the capital city of Yemen. And they sit there and say, we've got weapons that we can take things out with right precision. But these were residential houses and medical centres. Why? With no Hamas leaders in there. So what was the purpose of doing that?
I've got no idea, but surely if you meet President Herzog as the Prime Minister of the UK, you can say what you've just said to him, and you hope that he then feeds that back to the Israeli government. I
can't see him wanting to listen to what Keir Starmer has got to say, but why does it have to be in Downing Street? Why can we not use an intermediary like that Donald Trump was using with Israel and Hamas were using with Qatar?
OK, let's move on to another question. Lawrence is in Wembley. Hello, Lawrence.
Yes, good evening, Iain and panel. Does the panel agree with me that removing contactless payments, unlimited spend on these cards, will have unintended consequences and will cause a lot of harm? And I can't see the logic behind it.
Well, the Financial Conduct Authority has suggested to the government that the current £100 cap on contactless payments is scrapped and banks be allowed to decide what their own maximum spend limits are, if they even have a limit at all. I don't know if anybody's got any strong views on this one. Luke?
Well, I worked at the FCA. I worked on some of this, and the FCA is reviewing it. They've got to do all the research, to speak to the consumer groups and so on. It does support consumers' spend when the limit went up. It was originally 20, do you remember?
Yeah.
Can you imagine going back to something as low as that? We do need to look at protecting access to cash as well. And again, I was at the Bank of England, worked on the polymer, bringing in the polymer plastic notes. I am concerned about a trend where cash is no longer available for vulnerable people who need it. We've got to protect cash in places like the post offices and so on. We do have to have that mix between card and cash in the economy.
But if you use things like Apple Pay or Google Pay, there's no limit on those, is there? So, I mean, and they seem to me to be the most secure form of payment.
They do have extra security protocols in place. What I think this can do is unlock a bit of innovation so that you can go in your banking app and you can choose the limit that you feel most comfortable with. So if this is about empowering your listeners, make their own decisions about how they use their own cards, then I'm all for it.
Annabel?
I completely agree. I think we should be worried about the decline of cash and the concerns around financial exclusion, particularly for the elderly and the vulnerable. That said, I'm quite relaxed about contactless payments being made unlimited by banks and putting more power and control in the hands of consumers. Ultimately, people should feel free to do as they please with their own money. And as you say, Iain, there are correct controls in place, particularly when you're using something like Google Pay or Apple Pay, because you've got facial recognition software and passwords that are required in order for you to make very large payments. So I don't see a problem with it.
I mean, I would have thought that the way to smash the black economy is to try and eliminate cash as much as possible, Sharon.
I mean, as somebody who's an ambassador to a domestic abuse organisation, I actually spoke with people at the Bank of England about how we protect access to cash. More to go even further than that, how we encourage businesses to continue to accept cash so that survivors of domestic abuse can use the cash they've saved up. From a personal level, I probably will have to be one of those people that go in and lower their contactless limit.
You don't trust yourself.
I don't trust myself. And I think that having Apple Pay, probably I shouldn't, I probably don't see money in the same way as I would do if I had it in cash. I mean, my only other concern is that with potentially the rise in crime that we're seeing on the streets in London, if people's handbags were being taken and contactless had no limit whatsoever, how long does it take before someone can tap away and take the cash out of everyone's pockets? That's a bit overdramatic, but I think that's just where my brain goes.
Andrew?
Well, there seems to be agreement on the panel, and I sort of bow to Luke's professional opinion on this because he's been at the Bank of England and in the FSA. And I just think we should know how many more Labour MPs have been in the Bank of England. Because you've got Rachel who worked there, and Luke. And
are you saying this is a bad thing?
Well, no.
I was quite impressed.
No, absolutely. But I just wondered how many more of your colleagues.
I think there's Ali Stratton as well. So, yeah, I think there's at least three of us.
Right. OK, well, thank you very much for that question, Lawrence. Let's go to our fun question from Jesse in Horsham. An English sparkling wine has beaten all the champagne and Prosecco to win the Best Sparkling Wine Award at an international awards ceremony. Which other unsung gems from this country deserve to be shouted about all around the world? I wish I'd had the foresight or seen this question before, because we could have played Jerusalem to the answers that our panel are going to give. Luke, let's start with you.
I mean, is this any British iconography, or are you thinking?
Yeah, anything
drinks,
you like.
Beverage? I mean, drinks, it has to be the Minster Men Pale Ale that you Brew York do. It's fantastic. But, we should be so proud of the hard-working NHS staff. I've just had a little newborn, baby Louis, back in July. So I think some of those NHS workers are massive unsung heroes of this country.
Annabel.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm absolutely delighted that an English sparkling wine has come up victorious, because I think it's absolutely delicious and I much prefer it myself to Prosecco or champagne. I'm going to say, I'm not sure it's quite an unsung hero, but I love British motorway service stations.
Oh my
And they get
God.
a really bad reputation. And I just drove the length of France and back, and they were appalling. And yet people seem to believe that they...
I've got, when I'm visiting Andrew, I've got to drive up the M40, I guess, and then go down to Devon on the M5. So can you recommend your favourite service station on those motorways for me?
I'm not sure that I can. I'm so sorry. M5, I'm not sure I've ever driven on the M5.
OK, Sharon.
I do wish I had a bit of foresight into this question. I'm a countryside girlie. I was born and raised in Oxfordshire, and I'm a big fan of local honey, particularly if you have hay fever. I'm probably sure that's already won many awards, but I would just wish it was something that we exported around the world.
Andrew?
Well, I think it's very interesting that a British sparkling wine has won, and it shows you what is happening with climate change, that the temperatures are rising in the south of England.
More climate change then.
South of England, and that's why a lot of these French champagne houses are buying land and developing vines in the south of Britain. I also think that just outside the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, we do have a vineyard which produces rosé and sparkling rosé. And I'm looking forward to that winning, not just amongst my constituents in the royal town, but winning an international award as well. But in terms of the glories of Britain, we had a wonderful family holiday in the Hebrides. And I just think that one of the great, fabulous glories of Britain is the different scales of countryside, the different areas you can go and visit. And I think there's an enormous amount to be said for encouraging people from overseas to come on holiday in Britain and share that.
Well, I'm going to nominate the Garibaldi. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. On Monday's panel, someone who needs no introduction, Jeremy Corbyn, the Conservative Shadow Cabinet member, Victoria Atkins, businessman Steve Rigby, and LBC's own Rachel Johnson. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of what Russia did overnight in Poland and asking what might the long-term consequences of that be. Do you think Vladimir Putin was just testing NATO? I suspect that was his main agenda there. Did you wake up this morning like I did and thinking, oh my God, that we're nearer to a third world war now than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis? And I don't say that lightly, because it is the first time that Russia has ever gone into NATO airspace. Do you think the reaction of NATO was appropriate? How should we send a signal to Vladimir Putin that we won't put up with what he's doing?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, podcast host Charlie Kirk, a high-profile supporter of Donald Trump with millions of social media followers, has reportedly been shot at a university event in Utah. He's co-founder of the youth organisation Turning Point USA and is a powerful right-wing influencer in America. LBC's US